The warehouse roared like a beast. Flames clawed up the wooden beams, smoke pressed against the ceiling, and sacks of rice burst open, spilling white grains into the fire like snow feeding a storm. In the chaos, people screamed, trapped behind a wall of smoke and falling timbers. Through the haze, a woman's silhouette appeared, her shoulders broad, her gait steady. She bent down, lifted two men, one under each arm, as though they weighed nothing, and pushed through the inferno. The fire reflected on her sweat-soaked face, revealing not just strength, but defiance. No one in the village had ever looked at her this way before. Until this moment, she was just the rice woman, the one with rough hands, hunched back, and endless burdens. Now she was something else entirely. The warehouse was already an inferno by the time Maria Tran reached it. From the distance, she had seen the black smoke twisting into the sky, thick as tar, rising from the heart of the village's storage yard. Now, standing at the gate, she could hear the building screaming, wood cracking, beams snapping, glass shattering. People rushed around her like ants whose mound had been kicked apart, shouting, crying, pointing, and doing nothing all at once. Inside, they're still inside, someone yelled. Maria's eyes darted to the wide double doors, half swallowed by flame. The warehouse was the lifeline of the community, where rice from the surrounding fields was stored. Dozens of men and women worked inside daily, stacking sacks, sorting shipments, and watching over the grains that fed their families. Now the building had become a death trap. A boy stumbled out of the smoke, coughing violently. His arms were scraped, his shirt scorched, but he kept pointing behind him, gasping, "They can't get out," before collapsing into the dirt. The crowd shrank back, their faces pale. The fire was too fierce. The heat pushed them away like an invisible wall. A few younger men stepped forward, but hesitation froze their feet before they could reach the doorway. And then Maria moved. She didn't ask questions. She didn't scream. She didn't even look at the others. Her legs carried her forward with the same certainty they had when she once walked onto a competition stage, long ago. The heat slammed into her chest the moment she crossed the threshold. Smoke clawed down her throat, but she forced her body onward. The warehouse was chaos incarnate. Flames leaping from sack to sack, rice spilling like avalanches as bags burst open, turning the ground into a slippery white carpet. Wooden beams, thick as her waist, fell from above, some already glowing red. Through the haze, she saw them. 3 men pressed against a wall, coughing, eyes wide with terror. A heavy beam had crashed in front of them, blocking the way. Behind the beam, fire roared, ready to swallow them. Maria didn't think. Her muscles, though worn by years of labor, remembered. She bent down, gripped the beam, and with a guttural cry, heaved it upward. For a moment the weight resisted, mocking her. Her shoulders shook, tendons screaming against bone. Then, with one last surge, she rolled the timber aside, clearing a narrow path. "Go!" she barked, voice hoarse but commanding. The men stared at her, stunned. But when she grabbed one by the arm and pulled him forward, their paralysis broke. They stumbled past her, coughing and sobbing, vanishing into the open air behind her. Maria didn't follow. She turned deeper into the fire. Each step was a battle. The smoke grew thicker, swirling into her lungs no matter how tightly she pressed her mouth with her sleeve. The rice under her boots slid like sand. Her eyes burned, watering until everything blurred. But she kept moving. A scream pierced through the crackle of flames. To her left, Maria stumbled toward it, kicking aside half-burned sacks until she found a cluster of women and children huddled near a fallen stack of rice. The exit behind them had collapsed completely, timbers locked together like a barricade. "Help us!" one woman cried, clutching a little girl to her chest. Maria scanned the wall of wood. It wasn't just blocked. It was sealed by the very rice they had been stacking. Hundreds of pounds of grain weighed down the wreckage, pressing the boards together. To clear it, they would need more than speed, they would need strength. The kind of strength Maria had always tried to hide. She clenched her jaw, pushed forward, and dug her hands into the wreckage. Sacks as heavy as stones slid into her arms. One by one, she hoisted them aside, muscles straining, firelight glistening across her sweat-slick skin. The women gasped as they watched her move what had seemed immovable. When the rice was cleared, she braced herself against the timber, inhaled what little oxygen was left, and pushed. For a heartbeat, nothing. Her knees trembled. Pain flared across her back like knives. But then, like a door reluctant to open, the wood shifted. Inch by inch, space widened until sunlight and fresh air streamed through. "Go! Take the children!" Maria shouted. The women didn't hesitate this time. They scrambled through, dragging their children after them. Maria lifted the last child, a boy no older than 6, and practically threw him into his mother's waiting arms. For the first time, she allowed herself to stop, just for a breath. She leaned against the wall, heart pounding like a drum, lungs heaving smoke. Her vision spun. She could hear the fire laughing now, greedily devouring everything she saved. But she wasn't done. By the time she emerged again into the open air, she was carrying 2 unconscious workers, one under each arm. The crowd gasped. For a moment, they seemed to forget the fire entirely. Their eyes followed her like she was something they had never seen before. The village knew Maria. They had seen her every day, bent under the weight of rice sacks, shoulders hunched, face weathered by labor. They had whispered about her behind her back. So strong, but so pitiful. No husband, no family, nothing but work. But the woman walking out of the inferno now was not pitiful. She was terrifying. She was magnificent. She was strength incarnate. "Water!" she barked, and the crowd jumped to obey. Buckets were brought. The unconscious workers were revived. Screams turned to sobs of relief. And then someone asked, "How many more are inside?" Maria turned her head back toward the warehouse. Flames now reached the roof, where sparks shot into the sky like fireworks. The building groaned, timbers bending under heat. She knew it could collapse any second. Yet, without hesitation, Maria stepped forward again. "No, you can't." A man grabbed her arm. His voice cracked with panic. "It's suicide." Maria shook him off with a force that made him stumble back. Her eyes burned brighter than the flames behind her. "People are still in there," she said simply. And then she vanished into the fire once more. Inside, the roof had begun to sag. The world was breaking apart. Maria pressed forward, searching through smoke, ignoring the way her legs trembled now, ignoring the burn that ate at her lungs. She had carried heavier things than pain before. She had carried regret, guilt, loneliness. Compared to that, this weight was nothing. Another cry for help reached her ears. She turned toward it, deeper into the heart of the inferno. And the chapter ends there, with Maria disappearing into the fire, a figure both ordinary and extraordinary, a woman the world had dismissed, now standing between life and death with nothing but her strength. Morning came in a pale hush that made everything look gentler than it was. The scorched hull of the warehouse, the ash-softened dirt, the red ribbons of warning tape that flapped against a breeze smelling faintly of wet charcoal. Maria stood a few yards back from the ruins with her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee she could not quite bring herself to drink. Her palms had blistered in 6 places, her knuckles were split and ugly, and when she moved her neck it felt like someone had stuffed coals beneath her skin. She didn't mind any of it. The part she minded, the part she could never say aloud, was the silence that came after a scream. It had chased her through years. Neighbors kept trying to press thanks into her hands. Flowers, food, folded bills that she returned with a shake of her head. Men she'd known for years approached her like pilgrims. Hats clutched, gazes lowered as if they were apologizing for something they didn't know how to name. The little boy she had lifted through the broken exit the night before stood with his mother at the curb, hugging a stuffed turtle and staring at her in the wide-eyed way children stare at statues. When Maria glanced their way, the boy gave a small wave as if the movement might break the day. Maria's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. Across the street, a sheriff's cruiser idled. A fire investigator crouched near a blackened post, tapping at an iPad, while two volunteers rolled up hoses. The whole place wore the look of a battlefield no one would admit existed. Alive, not alive. Numbers instead of names, reports instead of stories. "Ms. Tran?" A voice called, delicate and careful. Maria turned. The woman walking toward her had a notebook tucked beneath her arm and a pen slid behind her ear. She looked quick, like a person who had learned to find answers inside slammed doors. Early 20s, hair pinned back, sneakers scuffed from running. "I'm Tessa," she said, "from the Valley Chronicle. May I?" She glanced at the recorder in her hand. "May I ask you a few questions?" "About the fire?" Maria asked. "Yes, and about you." Tessa's smile hovered, almost apologetic. "People say you carried men on your shoulders, that you moved a beam no one else could budge. People say." Maria lowered her gaze to her hands. The thicker-than-common calluses along the base of her fingers had marbled with ash. She'd spent years not explaining them. "You can ask," Maria said. "But I don't know that answers help." Tessa nodded, as if that was expected. "Then maybe just your name for the record." "Maria," she said softly. "Maria Tran." The pen paused over the notebook. "Some folks told me you used to be an athlete." Tessa's tone was tentative, as if she'd arrived at a locked cabinet. "A weightlifter." Maria didn't answer, not with words. She watched the steam rise from her coffee and thought of chalk dust. One form of white cloud traded for another. "You saved a lot of lives," Tessa said, still gentle. "People will want to know who you are." Maria tightened her grip on the cup until the lid creaked. The memory came up sudden and entire, like an old song punching through a static station. She did not invite it. It came anyway, a tide that rolled forward from a long-ago gym where the windows rattled when trains passed and the floor was scarred by iron and ambition. The memory said, "Once there was a girl who learned to lift." The first barbell Maria ever touched was not a thing of chrome and knurling. It was a broomstick in a crowded kitchen on the east side of Houston, where her mother measured rice with a teacup and her father kept time with the nightly news. This was before the corner only sold cheap beer and lottery tickets, before the pawn shop changed hands 3 times. In those days, the apartment smelled like fish sauce and laundry, and the windows sweated in summer. 60% of clean and jerk begins with the pull. Maria told a row of invisible students that did not yet exist. She had learned the words from a library book she did not fully understand and repeated them like a spell. Then she slid her hands wide on the broomstick and raised it from floor to hip to shoulder to ceiling, mimicking photos. Elbows high, core tight, fists strong. Her mother laughed the first time, a soft peal like a spoon against a glass. The second time, she did not laugh. She watched, a wary hope blooming in the space between her eyebrows. Maria's father worked long days at a rice mill, arriving home with shirts stiffened by dust and a voice made low by tiredness. He did not talk much about the past except to say that leaving had felt like pulling a nail from wood. Necessary, but there was always some part of yourself left stuck inside the old place. When he saw Maria with the broomstick, he frowned. When he noticed that the broom had lost most of its bristles, he bought another and said nothing of the first. At school, Maria's favorite place was the weight room the football boys used. Favorite was not the right word. It was the place where the constant noise inside her head sorted itself into rhythm. A coach would call out percentages and sets, 65% for 3x3, and she would translate instructions into inches and breadth, into chalk lines on black plates. The boys stared, then smirked, then stopped smirking when she squatted more than all but 2 of them and cleaned a loaded bar to her shoulders with a speed that made the plates rattle. They tried to rename her, as boys do, but none of their names fit, so she kept her own. The coach of the team, a man born to red caps and whistles, didn't know what to do with a girl who could lift like that but had no interest in cleats or helmets. He introduced her to a friend who knew the sport without pads. an old Bulgarian woman with a back like a plank and forearms crisscrossed by veins, who ran a weightlifting club in a warehouse behind a tire shop. Markova, the woman said the first day, with a hand extended like a general accepting a soldier. Elena, if you insist. Her accent stretched the syllables until they sounded like a challenge. I teach technique, not bravado. Bravado is for people with nothing to lift. In Elena's gym, the windows were painted shut and the radio only received one station. The platform was a patchwork of plywood and determination. There was a whiteboard with numbers that never fit neatly inside the grid. Maria learned the first lesson twice. Precision was mercy. It preserved your joints, it respected the weight, it kept the future open. Elena's hands were gentle only when they guided. Elbows up, she'd murmur, tapping Maria's arms. Hips through now. Yes, again. The second lesson Maria learned was less noble. Winning felt like eating after a fast. She liked the way the metal sang when she stood up from a clean. How a snatch, when done right, made time click into a single clear instant. Elena would say, now, and the bar would rise, and that word would be the only one in the room. At 17, Maria lifted at her first regional meet. The plates looked huge, the barbell too loud. She wore a singlet that made her feel as if she were stepping into a version of herself she was not sure she deserved. Her parents sat in the back row, her mother's hands clasped, her father's face unreadable beneath the brim of a baseball cap. Maria missed her first attempt at the snatch, pulled early, lost it behind. Elena did not scold. She placed a hand on Maria's shoulder and said, your mind went outside. Bring it in. Maria did. The second attempt flew, the third went heavier, and for a moment the world was nothing but her grip, the line of the bar, and the quiet that came when the judge's lights flashed white. By 19, she had calluses like old pennies and a passport with 2 stamps. She'd stood in hotel ballrooms that smelled like coffee and nerves and watched women from countries she could not pronounce chalk their hands with the serenity of nuns. She'd learned to tape her thumbs and ice her knees and pretend the tremor in her right shoulder was not there. She'd learned that some nights you cry for no reason except that your body has used itself up. She'd also learned that sometimes the world will love you if you make it gasp. That wasn't why she lifted, but it didn't hurt. At a national meet in St. Louis, she stood up from a clean that felt like a building and knew, before the bar settled on her shoulders, that the jerk would be there. She dipped, drove, and the plates left the floor as if eager to leave. When the center judge gave the down signal, the roar caught her off guard. Elena did not hug her. Elena was not a hugger. But she allowed her palm to rest against Maria's cheek for a heartbeat. And in that moment it was enough. Strong, Elena said simply. Because I have a good coach, Maria replied. Elena's eyes sharpened. Because you refuse to drop what hurts to hold. After the ceremony, a man from a training center in Colorado approached her with a card and a pitch that made Maria's heart stumble. We think you've got the numbers for the trials. With structured support you could, he kept talking. Maria watched the tiny reflection of herself in his glasses and felt as if she were peering at a stranger very close to her face. On the flight home, she kept the card pressed between the pages of her library book. She did not yet know whether the life he offered was a door or a wall. The answer arrived the way big answers often do, wrapped in smaller questions. The rice mill where her father worked cut shifts. Her mother's hands began to ache in the mornings. Elena's rent went up. Money was a puzzle Maria solved with hours. She took shifts cleaning apartments after training, then learned you could make more carrying boxes than mopping floors, and more still if the boxes were sacks of grain headed to the restaurants that made the city smell like home. She told herself that lifting was lifting, whatever the object. She did not tell herself how tired she was when she lay down in the narrow bed in the apartment she rented alone. The boy who would become the father of her child walked into the gym one afternoon wearing a grin that woke something mischievous in her ribs. His name was Daniel Reyes, and he was a paramedic with forearms she wanted to hold beyond practical reasons. He watched her lift with the reverence some people bring to sanctuaries and asked her questions he genuinely wanted answers to. He took her for tacos after training, listening as she tried to explain why a missed snatch at 85% felt more personal than a missed call from an old friend. He came to a meet and cheered so loud Elena almost smiled. When Maria told Daniel she was pregnant, he lay very still next to her in the dark. "We can make it work," he said at last, and she clung to the way he said "we" as if it were a new piece of equipment she'd been gifted. They made lists. They did weather math. They moved into a cheaper apartment closer to his station. Maria continued to lift for a while, carefully, under Elena's cautious eye. "You listen to your body," Elena said. "You don't prove anything to anyone you do not need to prove to." It turned out there were only two people Maria needed to prove anything to anymore, and one of them hadn't been born. Their daughter arrived with a full head of dark hair, and a cry that stitched up a hole in Maria she had assumed was permanent. They named her Lila after Daniel's grandmother. The first time Maria held her, a thought passed through her with the clarity of a coach's cue. Everything weighs less than this and everything weighs more. She whispered the names of lifts as she rocked Lila to sleep, a lullaby of movement. Snatch, clean, jerk, breathe, rest. After Lila, days restructured themselves. Training bled into naps, which bled into short shifts carrying rice sacks for cash because rent did not apologize. Maria learned that exhaustion had sub-basements. She learned to time grocery runs between feeding schedules and to accept that sometimes her body would refuse a bar as if it had learned a new word. No. She competed once more, not because the numbers made sense, but because she needed to know the part of herself that wasn't mother still fit. She went 1 for 6 and cried in the bathroom because the last thing she wanted was for the tears to feel like betrayal. Elena found her there and handed her a paper towel. "There are seasons," she said. "The bar will wait." "I don't know how to stop wanting it," Maria whispered. "Good," Elena said. But don't confuse wanting with worth." On a gray afternoon thick with humidity, Maria took a short job for extra cash. Unloading rice pallets at a restaurant supply warehouse on Canal Street. She strapped Lila into her car seat, kissed her forehead, and promised they would be back in time to meet Daniel for dinner. The work was routine. A forklift that hiccuped, a loading bay with a temper, a faded safety sign no one obeyed. Maria hefted sack after sack and thought about the meet schedule she might one day return to. The world, she believed, was expandable. The phone call came as a strangled voice, then a siren behind the voice, and then the words you never hear as words, only as an unmaking. There had been an accident on I-10. A truck. A chain reaction. A flame like a mouth. Daniel's crew had responded but had not been allowed to treat their own. The other paramedics had done everything correctly, and everything correctly had not been enough. Maria arrived at the hospital strangely calm, as if she were walking toward a platform with a weight she knew she could not stand up from but must try anyway. She named Daniel to the receptionist and said Lila's name even though the receptionist had not asked for it, and then she sat and watched the top of a TV no one was watching because she couldn't look down. When they told her, she said thank you to the person in scrubs. She signed a form. She used a pen that squeaked on the paper. Later, she would remember these details and wonder at the cruelty of what the mind chooses as anchors. The funeral did not happen right away because there were investigations and family to notify, and because the universe sometimes enjoys emptying a person of their last spoonful of patience. When it did happen, Maria wore the only black dress she owned and stared at a closed coffin with a certainty that made her dizzy. If she were strong enough, she could lift the lid and undo what had occurred beneath it. The notion was irrational, the way grief is irrational, the way hope clings to the bars of a cage and believes metal is merely stubborn air. After Daniel, the world shrank. The gym felt like a place built for a person whose arms had been swapped for someone else's. Maria would stand at the platform, chalk her hands, wrap her thumbs, and then return the bar to the floor untouched. Elena stopped programming numbers for her and started writing sentences. Walk, breathe, eat, sleep. Maria followed the sentences like a map through fog until one day she did not. She stopped going to the gym. She took longer shifts at the warehouse and then longer ones still. She told Elena nothing beyond a goodbye that was not a goodbye, and Elena let her leave with a grip on her forearm that said come back whenever the word after this word returns. For a time, the only lifting Maria did was in the service of moving food from truck to shelf and from shelf to van and from van to kitchen. She discovered something about grief. It prefers to be carried in the open, But if you hide it in your muscles long enough, they will begin to believe it is theirs. People called her strong and meant it as a compliment and as a way of not saying the other things. She accepted the compliment because rejecting it would require sentences she could not construct without falling apart. She became the woman who could shoulder a sack others struggled to drag. She became the woman you did not ask personal questions. She became the woman whose life you summarized in one tired adjective: hardworking. 2 winters after Daniel's death, Elena tracked her down at the back of a grocery when she was tossing sacks onto a dolly. The older woman stood in the fluorescent silence and looked at Maria like someone inspecting a building for load-bearing walls. "I have a program for you," Elena said without preamble. "I don't lift anymore," Maria replied. Elena shrugged. "Then it is a program for walking. But it looks like lifting." Maria wanted to laugh but did not know how. "I don't deserve it." "Deserve?" Elena made the word sound like a cheap tool. "The bar does not care what you deserve. Cares what you practice. We practice strength so we can carry what arrives uninvited." Maria said nothing. Elena handed her a folded sheet of paper anyway. At the top, in block letters, was a sentence: Week 1 move. The program sat on Maria's table for months. It collected a ring mark from a coffee cup and a crayon line from Lila. One night, when Lila had fallen asleep with her small hand wrapped around 2 of Maria's fingers, Maria stood and walked to the corner where she had stored the barbell she told herself she would sell. She slid plates onto the sleeves, felt their predictable bite against her palms, and breathed. The first pull was ugly. The second was less ugly. The fifth felt like a prayer said for the first time after a period of pretending you had nothing left to say. She did not return to competition. The idea was not anathema, just beside the point. What she returned to was the sensation of feeling her body assemble itself around a task. Nights when the apartment was quiet, she would set up a makeshift platform on the thin rug and perform complexes with a discipline that was both apology and absolution. She told no one. It was hers to keep or to discard. And then life, with its refusal to respect arcs, bent hers into a smaller circle. The restaurant supply warehouse where she'd found steady work closed. The mill 2 towns over offered shifts, and she took them without needing to be asked twice. She parked her grief like a truck in a wide lot where it could be ignored until the meter ran out. Work filled the hours. Lila learned her letters and grew legs that ran faster than Maria believed possible, and asked questions about Daniel that Maria tried to answer without building a shrine she could not dust. The day Lila began kindergarten, Maria carried a small backpack to the classroom door and felt a weight she would never snatch away from the ground. She watched Lila take a teacher's hand and measure the room with her eyes. There was a paper banner over the door that read welcome. Maria stood under that word until another parent brushed past and she remembered her body. On the drive home, she whispered to the empty seat, "I'll make it lighter for you." She did not mean money, though of course she did. She meant the world. She meant the way flames seemed to find her life's edges. She meant her own anger at physics and chance and the kind of fate that does not send a calling card. She would make it lighter. She promised, and promises have their own mass. That promise explained, later, why Maria took the night shift at the rice warehouse even though it paid the same as the day shift. Fewer people around meant fewer stories to be told and fewer eyes asking silent questions. It also explained why, when she found herself awake at 2 a.m., thinking of how a bar feels in the hands when your breath is clear and your feet are fast, she would channel the hunger into a stack of sacks instead of into a search for a meat calendar. People in town learned to rely on her. Call Maria if a pallet has warped. Call Maria if the back door sticks. Call Maria if you need help moving the thing you shouldn't have tried to move alone. She was grateful to be useful. She was ashamed to be grateful. She told herself that usefulness is not a moral category. It is a posture. Stand prepared. Manage the load. On the anniversary of Daniel's death, Maria took Lila to the small park where he used to meet them after a shift, the one with a bench too close to the street and a tree that had lost a large branch in a storm. They brought flowers. Lila, now 6, traced her finger along the grooves of Daniel's name on a small metal plaque the city had installed after a petition Maria hadn't known about. "Was Daddy strong?" Lila asked. "Yes," Maria said. "Very. Like you?" She could have told Lila, "Not like me in ways that matter." She could have inventoried the differences and the sameness. She could have said, "Strength is not a contest, and if it is a contest, no one wins the ones that count." Instead she said, "Yes," and felt two truths stack on top of each other like plates on a bar. Later that same day, Maria stopped by Elena's gym for the first time in more than a year. She stood in the doorway and inhaled deeply. The way a person inhales when they recognize the old house of a friend has been repainted, but the floor still creaks in the same places. A handful of lifters buzzed on the platforms. Elena looked up from a clipboard and said, as if Maria had been gone a week, "We saved a bar for you." "I'm not," Maria began. "Good," Elena said. "All the best lifting happens when a person is not something." Maria wrapped her thumbs because to not wrap her thumbs would be to admit the future was too precarious to grip. She took the empty bar and let it pull her shoulders into alignment while she rolled it along her thighs. She performed a set of muscle snatches, and then a set of hangs, and the air in the room thickened into attention. Elena did not say a number. She said, "Nice." And Maria understood this as permission to stay or to leave without explanation. She stayed. Not every day. Not in a way that announced itself. Some weeks she came twice, some never. When she did, she lifted with a quiet that told Elena more than any story could. She never went heavy. She never chased a personal record. She trained the way a person tidies a house after a storm. Sweeping corners, putting small things back in drawers, repairing hinges. This was the life that existed the night the rice warehouse burned. This was the context into which Tessa's questions floated like ash. This was the reason Maria could step into a fire and feel as if she were stepping into a gym with the chalk bowl placed exactly where it had always been. "Ms. Tran." Tessa was still there on the curb, ink gathering under her pen where Maria had allowed silence to be the answer. "Were you a weightlifter?" She tried again softly. "Yes," Maria said finally, and the word snagged in her throat. "Once." Tessa's eyes brightened but did not harden into the sharp look of someone scenting scandal. "Did that help you last night?" Maria considered. "Strength is a habit," she said after a moment. "Last night I remembered mine." "Will you?" Tessa hesitated. "Will you tell me more? For the paper? For people who have ideas about you that don't include this?" She gestured softly toward the blackened ribs of the warehouse. Maria looked down at her hands. The scabs had begun to pull tight. She thought of Elena's first lesson, "Precision is mercy." She thought of Daniel's voice, the way he would say "we" when he meant "I will not let you carry this alone." She thought of Lila, whose backpack had a purple ribbon on the zipper and a smudge of jam on the corner. "People will want to know who you are," Tessa had said, and Maria found herself split between the relief of being misunderstood and the terror of being seen correctly. "Not today," she said quietly. "But maybe soon." Tessa nodded as if soon were an address you could send letters to. "Thank you for your time," she said. And she meant the thank you both as gratitude and as an acknowledgement that time is what all of this is about. She wrote her number on the back of a business card and placed it on top of Maria's untouched coffee. "If you change your mind." Maria slid the card into her pocket and felt the square corner press against her thigh like a cue. The sheriff waved her over to answer questions about the sequence of events. She followed, moving carefully, as if a bar were on her back and she needed to mind her steps. She answered what she could. When asked how she had moved the beam, she said, "I pushed." And the deputy blinked because he wanted a story and she had given him physics. Afterward, she turned away from the ulna of the charred building and walked toward town. The sun had climbed and begun to warm the asphalt until the air above it wobbled. She passed the diner where Daniel had once eaten pancakes at 2 in the afternoon after a night shift because breakfast foods were the only ones that felt honest in daylight. A man sweeping the sidewalk nodded to her with reverence that embarrassed her. She nodded back with a gratitude that surprised her. At the corner, she paused at a storefront with a pasted sign. "Community Center. Temporarily closed for repairs." The glass held a film of dust that wrote yesterday over every reflection. Maria could see herself faintly. A woman with ash at her hairline, shoulders rounded not from defeat but from work, eyes that had learned to carry. It struck her then, sharp as the sound of plates hitting the floor. The community had been saved by something she'd spent years treating like a sin. The heavy thing she had tried to hide had become a door instead of a wall. "Mom!" A voice chimed behind her. She turned. Lila ran toward her with the wild, unmeasured stride of children. The girl's hair had escaped its braid in 4 directions. There was a tiny bandage on one knee where some adventure had shaved skin. Maria bent, careful, to catch her. Lila barreled into the embrace and bounced back a bit, surprised at the armor of her mother's soreness. "You okay?" Lila asked, scrunching her nose. "I am," Maria said. Felt almost like the truth. "Ms. Ortega said you're a superhero," Lila announced in a tone that accepted this as an ordinary fact in a world full of them. Maria huffed a laugh that startled a pigeon on the eave. "Ms. Ortega needs better glasses." "No," Lila said loyally. "She has new ones with sparkles." She peered up. "Are you going to be on TV?" "I hope not," Maria said, and it came out a little too fast. She softened her voice. But a lady from the newspaper asked questions. "What did you tell her?" "That I used to lift things." Maria brushed a bit of soot from Lila's cheek with her thumb. "And that last night some things needed lifting." Lila considered this with the seriousness only children bring to metaphors they do not yet know are metaphors. "You could lift the school if it gets boring," she suggested. "I could," Maria said. "But then where would we keep the crayons?" She squeezed Lila's hand, and the small fingers squeezed back. The world steadied an inch. They started home. The street was a palimpsest of the ordinary and the changed. A ladder leaning where it had not leaned yesterday. A garden hose stretched snake-like across a lawn. A burned glitter drifting near the curb that might once have been a grocery receipt. Maria pointed out a dog who insisted on walking its person. Lila pointed out a cloud that looked like a scrambled egg. On their block, someone had tied a ribbon around the mailbox, and Maria did not like the way the ribbon made her want to cry. At the apartment, Maria unlocked the door and considered the bar in the corner. It leaned against the wall like a question. She set water to boil and pulled out a loaf of bread and an egg and showed Lila again, for the 3rd time in a week, how to crack the shell gently on the counter and slip the contents into a bowl without letting any pieces of chalk white sink into the yellow. Lila's tongue poked between her teeth as she focused. It occurred to Maria that in every act of teaching there is a little grief. As one world ends, another begins, equally valuable and equally impossible to hold forever. When the dishes were done and Lila had been coaxed into her homework, Maria stood before the bar and rapped her thumbs. Just a few pulls, she told herself. Just to remind the body of the alphabet it knows. The first pull drew a line through the fog in her head. She let the bar settle in the crease of her hips and felt, distantly but certainly, the old machine hum on quads, hamstrings, lats, grip. The second pull was smoother. The third was a word she'd almost forgotten how to pronounce. "Strong," Lila said from the table, not looking up from her worksheet. Maria glanced over. "You too." "I'm doing my letters," Lila said, as if that proved it. Then, after a moment, she added, "Are you going to stop lifting now that people know?" Maria let the bar down with a quiet clatter. The question hung in the room like steam. She thought of Tessa's card. She thought of the burned-out ribs of the warehouse. She thought of her father's hands, of Elena's commands, of Daniel's laugh, of the way a snatch, when it lands, makes everything in you feel held by something larger than you. "No," she said finally. "I think I'm going to pick it up." The words surprised her, not because they were untrue, but because of how easily they came. She felt the first prickling of a decision assembling itself somewhere deep, like bone knitting around an old fracture. The part of her that wanted to stay small shifted, a reluctant tenant packing boxes. That evening, after Lila fell asleep against a pillow that bore the faint stain of strawberry shampoo, Maria set a chair by the window and watched the sky shade from blue to a purple bruised by smoke. She pulled out Tessa's card and laid it next to Elena's old program, the one with the coffee ring and the crayon line. Day by day, week by week, the sheet had been a quiet witness. She traced the creases with a fingertip and then, without quite meaning to, she wrote a sentence on the back. I carried what I could and put the rest down here. In the distance, a siren dopplered, then fell away. Somewhere, a neighbor laughed at something on TV. Somewhere else, a couple argued, not unkindly. The world went on, as it does, at weights that felt bearable and weights that did not. Maria rested her head against the cool pane and closed her eyes. Strong, Elena had said once, tapping her heart rather than her arm, is not what you do to the bar. Strong is what you refuse to set down. In the morning, Maria would walk back to the ruins and ask the foreman what needed doing. She would stand where she had stood and listen for the echoes that folded the present into the past, then choose the small tasks that rebuild a life. Maybe she would call Tessa and give her a little more than a name. Maybe she would drive to the gym and let Elena see her silhouette in the doorway again. For now, she allowed herself the luxury of staying still. She let the night edge into the room. She let her breath count itself. In and out, steady, the way you prepare for a lift you cannot afford to miss. Outside, the town settled. Inside, the bar rested. Between the two, Maria held the thin line of now, a quiet, stubborn possession. The whispers of her past did not accuse. They did not call her back. They stood alongside her, like spotters ready to help if the weight tipped. She took their company as she had refused so much else. Not because she deserved it, but because it was time. When she finally rose and turned off the lamp, she paused at Lila's door. The small body curled on the mattress breathed a rhythm that could have been a metronome. Maria watched for a long minute, then, very gently, slid her palm under Lila's hand and lifted a fraction of the girl's sleeping weight, as if to remind herself of scale and promise and the fact that the heaviest things are often the most willingly carried. Tomorrow, she whispered into the dark that was not empty, we lift what we can. And the room, in its soft and unremarkable way, agreed. The warehouse smelled different now. Not of fire, but of damp ash and disinfectant, of wood gone brittle and grain soured by smoke. The flames had been put out 2 nights ago, but the ruins still drew people as if the skeleton of the building could answer questions no one knew how to ask. Maria stood on the edge of the taped perimeter with a broom in her hand. Volunteers had been coming in shifts, shoveling, sweeping, salvaging what little could be carried. Some sacks of rice, charred but sealed, had been stacked into a corner for inspection. Others had exploded into mounds of wasted white, now a soggy carpet that no one had the heart to look at too long. Ms. Tran, a voice called. It was the sheriff. His hat was pulled low against the sun. You should take a break. Get some rest. I will, Maria said, brushing soot into neat piles. She had been saying the same thing for 3 days. The town had changed since the fire. Neighbors who once barely nodded at her now paused in the street to say thank you with a sincerity that made Maria uncomfortable. The cashier at the grocery store slipped an extra loaf of bread into her bag without a word. Strangers came to her with stories of how they had heard about what she did, how she carried men on her shoulders, how she moved beams with her bare hands. The details shifted each time, retold with the soft exaggerations of awe. First, Maria corrected them. I didn't carry 2 men at once, she muttered to one. They weren't that heavy, she insisted to another. But the corrections never stuck. People wanted the myth, not the math. Eventually, she stopped trying. What unsettled her most wasn't the gratitude. It was the stares. Not cruel anymore, but reverent. She was used to being invisible in plain sight. The rice woman, the carrier, the figure bent under loads others avoided. Now, when she walked through town, people's eyes followed her like she was a story walking past. The stories traveled farther than she expected. 2 days after the fire, the Valley Chronicle ran a front-page headline. The strong woman of Oak Ridge saves dozens in warehouse blaze. The photo beneath showed her silhouette against the flames. Someone had snapped it from a distance, the orange glow making her look almost mythic. The article called her a hero, quoted eyewitnesses, and described her as a quiet worker known for carrying rice sacks heavier than most men could lift. Maria bought the paper without intending to. She read it once, standing by her kitchen counter, then folded it tightly and slid it into a drawer beneath her dish towels. But the story didn't stay local. Regional news outlets picked it up. Within a week, a crew from Houston drove down, cameras in tow. Maria refused interviews, slipping out back doors, deflecting with curt no's. But the more she resisted, the more curious they became. That was when people began whispering, not just about what she did in the fire, but about who she had been before. It started with the younger ones. "Did you see her hands?" One boy whispered to another outside the diner. "Like chalk, almost. My uncle says she used to lift weights. Like real weights. I heard she was in the Olympics," another said, his voice daring disbelief. "Nah," came the answer. "If she was famous, why'd she end up here carrying rice?" The questions spread like sparks in dry grass. The fire had made Maria visible. Now her past, the one she had worked so carefully to bury, began to stir from the ashes. Tessa, the reporter, returned. This time she didn't bring a recorder. She brought a folder. "I started digging," she said softly, standing at Maria's door. "You were at Nationals. You had records. There are articles, photos, meet results." She laid down a faded clipping. "Young lifter from Houston stuns at regional competition." Beneath the headline was a picture of Maria at 19. Arms locked overhead, barbell gleaming, her face radiant with effort. Maria stared at the image as if it belonged to someone else. "That was a long time ago." "But it was you," Tessa pressed, her tone more reverent than invasive. "Why doesn't anyone here know?" Maria closed the folder. Her voice was low, almost a growl. "Because the medals don't lift what matters." For a long moment, the room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Then Tessa nodded, slowly, as if she understood more than Maria wished she did. "I won't print anything without your permission," she said. "But people deserve to know the truth, not rumors." Maria wanted to say the truth doesn't change anything. She wanted to say the past is heavy enough without being dragged into the present. But the words stuck. Instead, she said, "Leave it be." The next morning, Maria returned to the ruins of the warehouse. The skeleton of the building stood sharp against the dawn. Children chased each other on the road nearby, their laughter mixing with the sound of hammers as carpenters began measuring for repairs. One of the workers paused to wipe sweat from his brow and looked at her with quiet respect. "You're the reason my brother's alive," he said simply. Maria didn't know what to answer. She turned back to the ruins. The air was clear now, no smoke left, no fire. Yet Maria felt the flames still there, licking at her ribs, threatening to burn open a history she had spent years smothering. The ashes had given her recognition. But recognition, Maria knew, was its own kind of fire. And some fires are harder to survive than others. The nights after the fire came in shards. Maria would wake at 1:13 a.m. or 2:06 or 3:42. Numbers that formed no pattern but felt like a code she ought to solve. In the dark, the apartment sounded like other people's homes. A refrigerator sighing, a pipe clicking, a neighbor's TV stitching together the end of a movie. She would lie on her side and listen to Lila breathe in the next room, that soft, reliable metronome, and wait for her own heartbeat to lower from a sprint to a jog. When she did sleep, the dreams braided themselves from the same chords. Fire and chalk, the roar of a crowd and the crack of a falling beam, a judge's down signal, a paramedic's voice. Wakefulness wasn't relief so much as a change of heat. On the fourth night, she gave up on pretending. She stood, padded to the small kitchen, and filled a pot. The hiss of the faucet seemed too loud for sleeping hours. As the water warmed, she took a shoebox from the cabinet above the stove, the one she usually ignored, and set it on the table. She had filled the box slowly over the years. Not out of sentimentality but out of cowardice, if she was honest. If the memories were contained, she could decide when to open them. Inside were medals and meet passes, a lift ticket with her name half smudged, a photo of her and Elena standing in front of a sheet of plywood someone had painted to look like a banner, a newspaper clipping about local athletes with national dreams, and 2 items she rarely allowed herself to touch. A small knit beanie from the hospital nursery where Lila had been born, and Daniel's old station patch, the Velcro back stiff with years. Maria turned the patch over in her hands and let its weight sit there. There was a time when she'd believed weight was simple. You either lifted it or you didn't. You trained hard enough, you made it obey. But grief, she'd learned, didn't move like a bar. It moved like a tide, arriving when it wished, receding when it pleased, teaching you that standing upright could be an act of heroism no one else witnessed. She set the patch aside and picked up a medal, a bronze from a regional where the platform had sloped just enough to make everyone mutter. She'd loved that meet. The imperfections had made it honest. She traced the edge and felt a flicker of something like hunger, then felt ashamed by it, as if wanting was an act of betrayal. "Mom!" Lila's voice floated down the hallway, blurred with sleep. "In here," Maria called softly. Small feet padded across linoleum. Lila appeared in the doorway, hair skewed, cheeks creased by the pillowcase pattern. "You're cooking?" "Tea," Maria said. "And, looking." Lila leaned on the table, craning to see. "Is that the hat I wore when I was a peanut?" "Not a peanut," Maria corrected. "A very opinionated almond." Lila grinned and then became solemn. She picked up one of the medals, felt its cool circle, and let it dangle. "Does this mean you won?" "It means I did what I came to do that day," Maria said. "Sometimes. Is that why people are talking about you?" "No," Maria said after a beat. "They're talking because of the fire." Lila nodded as if this were obviously separate. "Ms. Ortega said you didn't panic." "I did," Maria said. "I just panicked in the direction of the door." Lila considered this, then placed the medal back carefully, as if returning a bird to a nest. "Can I have hot chocolate?" "You may," Maria said, grateful for the assignment. She stirred milk into a small pot, watched the swirl, and thought about how ordinary things made arguments against catastrophe simply by existing. When the cups were set, Lila slid onto a chair and propped her chin on her palm. "Why did you stop lifting on stages?" There it was, the question people had asked in whispers, dressed now in the simplicity of a child's grammar. Maria could say, "Because I was tired, because I was hurt, because wanting began to feel like theft." She could say, "Because the world rearranged itself and the platform no longer sat in the center of the room." She could say, "Because the person I loved died and the story I knew about strength turned into a map I didn't know how to read." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "I didn't stop lifting," she said. "I just changed where." "But why?" "Because you're Dad. Because things got heavy in a different way." She met Lila's eyes. "And I didn't know how to carry both kinds at once." Lila weighed this like a small judge with a clipboard. "You carry me." "Yes," Maria said. "That helps." They drank. The tea cooled. The box sat open like a wound that, for the moment, did not bleed. In the days that followed, the town ground forward in its polite, stubborn way. There were meetings at the community center even though the sign on the door insisted it was closed. There were church potlucks that multiplied pies as if pies were capable of solving structural problems. There were men in hard hats who spoke a dialect of measurements and deadlines. There were women who organized supply drives with a precision that would have impressed Elena. Tessa called twice. The first time, Maria let it ring out. The second, she answered and said, "Not yet." And Tessa said, "Okay." And the okay sounded like someone patiently holding a door. Elena came by the warehouse one morning as Maria was sorting salvaged sacks into maybe and no. The older woman did not cross the tape. She just watched for a long beat, then said, "You were always good in chaos." Maria snorted. "Is that a compliment?" "It is a diagnosis," Elena said. "Compliments are for ceremonies. We are not in a ceremony." Maria gestured at the blackened beams. "Feels like a verdict. Only if you stop here." Elena's gaze landed gently on Maria's hands. "Tessa came to see me." "Of course she did. She is careful." Elena's mouth twitched, as close to a smile as she'd allow in public. "Better than the men who think stories happened to them because they showed up with a microphone." "What did you tell her?" "That you were a lifter. That you are a lifter." A pause. That you have always been a lifter, even when you refused to touch the bar. Maria swallowed, throat thick with ash and something else. I don't want to be a symbol, Lena. Symbols are for people who need shortcuts, Elena said. You are a person. Let her write that. Maria shook her head. It won't change the roof. No, Elena agreed. But it might change who stands under it when it's rebuilt. They stood in silence. The two of them arranged like bookends around a story neither wished to read aloud. At last, Elena nodded toward Maria's shoulder. You're protecting your right side. Just tired, Maria lied. We will pretend I believe you. Elena reached into her pocket and held out a small roll of athletic tape. For when you decide to stop pretending. Maria took the tape. It sat in her palm like a yes she didn't know how to utter. The sheriff's report named the cause of the fire as electrical, likely a short behind the eastern supply wall. It contained phrases like, no negligence found, and safety measures adequate, and loss of inventory estimated. It did not contain words like miracle or luck or almost. People brought candles to the chain link fence anyway. Someone taped a poster board where residents could scrawl thanks. A child had drawn a woman with triangle shoulders lifting a rectangle man. The proportions were all wrong, which somehow made the emotion more accurate. Maria avoided the fence at first. The publicness of gratitude unnerved her. On the 8th day, she stopped and read the messages because not reading them had begun to feel like an act of cruelty. Thank you for bringing my dad out. You didn't know me and you helped me. I'll owe you forever, but I'll pay it forward instead, Leo. In the bottom corner, a small handwriting she recognized wrote, My mom is strong. Lila with a heart that looked like it had been drawn while walking fast. She took out the pen someone had left and hesitated. What does a person write to a wall that has started to believe in them? She wrote we all carried. Then, smaller, because truth prefers corners, she added, M. Beautiful, Tessa said behind her, making Maria jump. You move like a cat, Maria muttered. I move like a reporter who knows when not to interrupt a moment, Tessa said wry. She offered no tape recorder, no notebook, only 2 paper cups. I brought coffee. It's terrible. I'm trying to quit terrible, Maria said. But she took the cup anyway. The heat bit her palm. A good bite. They stood side by side, staring at invention and loss. It was awkward for a few breaths, then less so the way a bar feels lighter after a good first pull. My editor keeps asking for the full arc, Tessa said at last, making quotation marks with her fingers. Origin, fall, redemption, you know, the classical shape. People like stories that behave, Maria said. They do. Tessa's voice shifted, careful, yes, but carrying something like duty. But the rumors are messy. Some say you quit because of an injury. Others say, because of your husband. And some say something about a child and I keep correcting them. Stop. The word snapped out harsher than Maria intended. Tessa flinched, then stood her ground. I'm not printing gossip, Tessa said, steadier now. But gossip will print itself without me. I'd rather people know the truth from you, if you're ever ready. Maria stared at the fence until the chain links reshaped themselves into a grid. I lost Daniel, she said, each word like a plate placed on a bar. Not my daughter. Some people mix the two because grief sounds the same from a distance. I'm sorry, Tessa said, and the simplicity of it allowed the words past Maria's guard. So am I, Maria replied, and they let the wind edit the rest. Would you let me write that? Tessa asked after a while. The part you said about grief. From a distance. Maybe, Maria said. But not yet. Tessa nodded. Then I'll wait for your not yet to turn into a yes. You say that like it's guaranteed. I say that like I've seen it happen, Tessa said. And for the first time Maria wondered what weights the young woman carried under her own neat cardigan. Everyone had a bar somewhere. At home, Maria pulled down a second box, the one she never opened. It lived at the back of her closet under an old duffel. The lid stuck. She pried it free with the flat of her palm and braced herself. On top lay a folded program from Daniel's memorial. The edges rippled where someone had cried on it. Beneath were Polaroids. Daniel in a cheap cowboy hat. Daniel bent over Lila's infant face, making an expression halfway between wonder and terror. Daniel asleep on the couch with his feet on the coffee table and a medical textbook like a blanket. Halfway down, she found the accident report. The one the lawyer had insisted she keep even though she'd wanted to set it on fire and scatter the ash across the freeway. The language was clinical to the point of violence. Impact. Intrusion. Fatal. The diagrams looked like a child's drawing of two rectangles arguing. The part that caught her every time was not the conclusion, not the black and white of cause, but the timestamp. 1738. She had been unloading rice sacks at 1738. She had thrown one up and caught it at shoulder height and readjusted her hands because the bag had slumped unevenly. It was a gesture so automatic she could reproduce it now without thinking. The way the hip absorbs, the way the finger joints push, the breathing split in two. Sometimes she hated the precision of her own memory. Sometimes she loved it for how it kept him from evaporating. She replaced the papers and sat back on her heels. The floor was not comfortable. Good. She was tired of comfort that felt like cowardice. When she stood, her knees cracked in a way that suggested Elena's program rather than any epiphany. She went to the corner, wrapped her thumbs and set the bar. The empty pull rattled as it always did. The first set of hangs cleared a fog that had nothing to do with smoke. She added small plates, not because numbers mattered but because she needed the sound of them. Between sets, she let her mind do what she'd trained it to do, notice without narrating. Where did the bar brush? Where did her elbows stick? When did her feet whisper too soon? Halfway through, Lila padded in barefoot, clutching a plush turtle by one leg. Ms. Ortega says I should bring something for show and tell tomorrow, she announced, very businesslike. Could I bring a medal? You could, Maria panted. But you'd have to tell the story that goes with it. I like stories, Lila said. Can I tell the fire one? If you do, you say everyone helped, Maria said. Not just me. Okay. Lila watched her mother pull, then cocked her head. What does that one feel like? Like remembering, Maria said. She realized it was true. 2 days later, the community held a meeting in the church hall to discuss the warehouse rebuild. Folding chairs multiplied. Coffee urns steamed. Maria sat near the back because sitting near the back had been her way of taking up less space for years. Elena sat beside her with her arms folded like a fortress. The foreman laid out timelines. The fire chief talked about code. The mayor said words that sounded like commitment and words that sounded like campaign. People asked reasonable questions. Others asked the kind of questions you ask when the real question is why did this happen? And no one can answer that without pretending to be God. In the middle of it, a man Maria didn't recognize stood and turned to face the crowd rather than the front. We should say it plain, he announced, voice thick with the righteousness meetings like these breed. We're here because a person in this room went into that building when the rest of us stood outside. A murmur rippled. Heads swiveled. Maria's stomach dropped. The urge to leave flared. Elena's hand pressed, firm and warning, against Maria's forearm. The man pointed, not unkindly, not gently either. Miss Tran, will you come up? Say a few words? No, Maria said into the space only she could hear. But the crowd had begun to clap. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a demand. It was an insistence that frightened her precisely because it was warm. She stood because not standing would have made a scene. She kept her eyes down because eyes felt like hands. At the front, she put her palm on the edge of the podium as if checking its stability. Hi, she said, because she could not think of anything else. Laughter burbled in relief. I don't have speeches, she added. I have work. Tell us how you did it, someone called. Maria glanced toward the doors, the exits, then decided to do the thing Elena had told her to practice when the bar felt unforgiving. Breathe. I didn't do it, she said. We did. Some of you brought water. Some of you called. Some of you held doors. Some of you got people out after I pushed the first beam. Some of you cleaned up later. The good thing about fire, she added, surprising herself, is that it reminds you we live near each other. A pause. She could feel 100 shoulders lower. As for how, she went on, It wasn't special. I moved what I could move. And I didn't stop when it hurt because stopping was worse. Were you scared? A child's voice piped up from the middle rows, maybe given permission by the presence of folding chairs to be reckless. Yes, Maria said. Being scared means you know the size of the thing you're facing. It doesn't have to mean you stop. Is it true you used to lift? Like, for crowds? Another voice asked, tentative, as if asking a teacher if the homework counted. Maria could lie. She had gotten good at it. But the lie had begun to itch like a tag in a shirt. Yes, she said. A long time ago. Will you again? She almost said no. It had been the answer for so long it felt like a part of her name. But then she saw Lila's face in the last row, her small mouth a determined line, and she thought of the fence messages, of Elena's tape in her pocket, of Tessa's card by the sink, of Daniel's station patch, of the way her body had woken when the bar touched her thighs. I don't know, she said, but I'll lift where I am. Afterward, people pressed her hands, then for once seemed to sense when enough was enough. In the parking lot, under the sodium lights, Tessa hovered with patience. May I quote that last part? She asked. Lift where I am? You may, Maria said. Remove the stutter. I'll keep it, Tessa said, smiling. It's honest. Honest is dangerous, Maria said. Only to lies, Tessa replied. Elena snorted. The reporter is a philosopher. We should worry. They stood there another 10 minutes, not saying what any of them were thinking. Then Maria drove home, rolled down the windows, and let the night cross her skin. In the weeks that followed, the town's attention didn't disappear. It matured. The camera vans left. The fence stayed, less as a shrine now and more as a bulletin board. People got back to the business of grocery lists and late notices and car trouble. A few asked Maria for advice on lifting boxes without hating their backs. She showed them how to hinge at the hips, how to keep the weight close, how to use their feet like truth. She made sure not to lecture. Teaching, she'd decided, only worked if the pride in the room ran both ways. She started stopping by Elena's gym on Thursdays with Lila in tow. Lila would do homework on a bench, tongue peeking, while Maria worked through complexes with a restraint that looked like elegance from a distance. Elena programmed like a person paying attention. We build joints that don't lie, she said. We build habits that don't leave. On the chalkboard, someone had written in neat print, Precision is mercy. Below it, in a Messier hand, Strength is a habit. It embarrassed Maria to see her own words on a wall, the way it once embarrassed her to be seen lifting at all. One Thursday, after doubles that turned her legs to warm rope, Elena set down her clipboard. Come Saturday, she said casually. We're doing an open platform. No judges. Just people who like iron. I'm not, Maria began. Exactly, Elena said. No one is. Come anyway. The idea needled her all evening. Not because she wanted to show off, those circuits had long ago been rewired, but because a part of her craved the solidity of a room full of people who knew what a bar weighs without asking. She told herself she'd come to watch. She told herself she'd bring Lila for an outing. She told herself many things. On Saturday, she rapped her thumbs. The open platform buzzed without screaming. A retired teacher in his 60s power snatched a weight that made the room applaud the reality of longevity. A teenager missed an easy clean, laughed, and made it again with better timing. Someone's kid toddled across the rubber mats and the barbell jumped and 4 adults caught it with the collective reflex of a village. Maria loaded 45s as if reintroducing herself to an old friend. The plates said little, which was a kindness. The first snatch from the floor felt like a sentence in a language she hadn't spoken aloud in a long time. Stilted, then unspooling. She sat under it, and for a second the room narrowed to the bar and the space above her head. The stand was not pretty. It did not have to be. Someone clapped once, respectfully. Elena did not look up, which was the highest compliment. On the third attempt, still conservative, still cautious, she felt the thing she'd missed even more than numbers. That sense of the world aligning for a breath, of the bar moving not because she forced it but because she got out of its way. She set it down and the rubber skidded and her heart tapped a beat she recognized from a life she thought was over. after Lila ran into her shins. "You were very, very medium," she declared, having dutifully absorbed Maria's distaste for adjectives like amazing. "Perfect," Maria said. Tessa was there too, it turned out, in jeans and a t-shirt, no camera, no pen, just someone who likes to see people do the thing they were made to do. She didn't bother Maria, which meant she noticed a lot. Later, she would write a piece for the Chronicle that wasn't about heroism or redemption or any other word that gets carved onto plaques. It was about work. About how the town had held together not because one person did the impossible, but because many people did the difficult and did not stop. Maria didn't recognize herself in the sentences at first. Then she did, and it didn't feel like being trapped. It felt like being included. The heaviest history Maria carried was not medals or papers. It lived in a place the body thinks of as private. The low hum of fear that, at any moment, everything could catch fire again, in ways literal or metaphorical. You don't heal that by lifting a landmark number or by telling your story to a single reporter or by standing at a podium in a church hall. You heal it by building days that refuse to burn. She built them. Morning walks. A thermos that actually kept coffee hot. Thursday nights at the gym. Saturday errands with a little extra time to stand in the library aisles and pick a book because the cover felt right. A habit of texting Elena a single emoji when a lift felt like language. A habit of texting Tessa a no when a day felt too thin for talk, and sometimes a yes because the no had become a reflex she no longer needed. She drove past the spot on I-10 where Daniel had died once a month on purpose, and nodded to it the way you nod to someone you used to live with. She told Lila stories about him that didn't make him a statue. How he'd once spilled coffee on his own pants and driven an entire shift with a damp patch because he refused to be late to a call. How he had a bad singing voice and sang anyway. How he believed pancakes at 2 in the afternoon were medicine science had not yet studied enough. She returned the second box to the closet and did not relock it. She left the first box on a shelf where the light could find it without glamour. When the mayor's office announced a date for the groundbreaking of the new warehouse, pure pageantry, the real work already underway, Maria agreed to attend but refused the shovel with the pretty ribbon. "My hands dig enough," she told Tessa, who laughed and did not try to convince her otherwise. On the morning of the ceremony, the town gathered with its Sunday energy. Slightly awkward, a little overdressed, proud. There were speeches. There were sweaty palms. There were kids who fidgeted because the ground was more interesting than adults with microphones. When it was over, the crowd swelled then thinned, and Maria stood a moment longer, looking at the cleared space where timber would rise again. "Hey!" A voice said, soft, familiar. She turned. A woman in a navy uniform stood a few yards away, hair tucked back, face the complicated map of someone who knows sirens in her bones. "You're Maria." It wasn't a question. "And you are?" "Angela Reyes," the woman said. "Daniel's sister." The world tilted. The ground remained loyal. Maria took a step and then another. They stopped at the distance where you can see the exact shade of someone's eyes. "I'm sorry," Angela said. "It's taken me a long time." "You owe me nothing," Maria managed. "I owe you coffee," Angela said unexpectedly. "And a hug. But maybe the coffee first." They sat later in a diner whose windows rattled when people walked by too heavy-footed. The coffee was mediocre in the way that made it appropriate. They traded small stories first because you can't lift the max without warming up. Jobs, weather, gasoline, the grocery store that smelled like cilantro. Then they traded the other stories with a care that made the table seem holy. Maria watched Angela's fingers on the cup. They were Daniel's hands. She had known that bone structure longer than she had known any language. "I avoided you," Angela admitted, voice so soft the sugar packets leaned closer to hear. "Because when I saw you, I saw him. And because I was angry at everything and you were the nearest everything." "I avoided you," Maria said, "because I thought you might tell me I should have done something different." "What?" Angela asked, half smiling. "Like told the truck not to be where it was? Told the road to curve? Like told him to take the day off," Maria said. And they both laughed. And it was the first time the sound didn't sound like a break. They set a time for Angela to meet Lila. They set another time to cancel that time if the day hurt. They became two people who stopped being alone in the same way. On a Monday evening that smelled faintly of rain and detergent, Maria stood at the window with the bar wrapped in her palms. Outside, the streetlights were slow to switch on. Inside, Lila practiced spelling, carrying, and asked every third word what it felt like in her mouth. Maria pulled from the floor and thought, as the bar swept, of how much of her life had been organized by the verbs she chose. Lift, carry, hold, let go, refuse, return, teach, forgive. None of them canceled the others. They made a set. On the last rep, she let the bar settle to her hips, hands loose, a controlled surrender. Not everything had to be driven overhead to count. Some days you measure strength by what you can put down gently. Mom, Lila said without looking up. How do you spell enough? Maria spelled it for her. The letters surprised her as they left her mouth. She had always thought of enough as the enemy of still wanting. Now it felt like a platform you build so wanting has somewhere safe to land. You're doing your new habit, Lila observed, pen hovering. The Thursday one. It's Monday, Maria said. You know what I mean, Lila said, rolling her eyes with the authority of an elementary school philosopher. Yes, Maria said. I do. She looked at the bar. She looked at her daughter. She looked at the window catching the last of the day. Her hands, banded with old callus and new tape, ached in that honest way that tells you you've used them for the thing they were good at. The weight she carried had not vanished. It had redistributed. It had taught her where to stand so the bar made the most of gravity, and she did, too. It had taught her the bore of a beam just as surely as it had taught her the sweet spot of a pull. It had taught her that the world does not divide cleanly between heroes and the helped, but that on the best days the two categories blur until the word is simply neighbor. She set the bar down and the apartment held the sound like a heartbeat. Lila wrote enough and underlined it twice. Rain started as if it had been held back only by courtesy. Maria turned off the lights and the room shifted from practical to private. She touched the station patch on the shelf as she passed, a ritual not of pain but of inclusion, and kissed Lila's hairline. In the mirror by the door, she caught a glimpse of herself. Not the silhouette against flames, not the girl with a bar overhead under a stranger's banner. Just a woman in a quiet room, strong in ways that did not need an audience. Tomorrow there would be more carrying. Of rice, of stories, of the small indignities of laundry. Of phone calls and forms and possibly a headline that said less than it meant. There would be lifts that felt slanted and lifts that landed as if the world had been designed for that moment. There would be overcooked eggs and the smell of wet pavement and at least one argument about bedtime. The heaviness would arrive when it wished and leave when it pleased. She would meet it at the door, take what was hers, set down what wasn't, and make a path for whoever came behind. Because that is what you do when the weight is yours. You carry it, you teach it manners, and you refuse to let it decide who gets out when the beams fall. And sometimes, though not always, the world claps. Not because you are a symbol, but because you have made a space where fear does not get the final word. That, she thought as she closed the bedroom door softly and breathed with the slow tide of sleep beginning again, is enough. By late summer, the warehouse grounds no longer looked like ruins. Where blackened beams once stabbed the sky, scaffolding now laced upward, skeletal but steady. The smell of smoke had finally faded, replaced by sawdust and cement, by the bright tang of new beginnings. Maria still worked there most mornings, hauling, sorting, sweating alongside the men and women who had come to rebuild. She preferred the labor to the talk. It was easier to measure progress in stacked boards and tightened bolts than in the vague currency of gratitude. But the town had not let her slip back into invisibility. Everywhere she went, people nodded to her with that same look. Respect, curiosity, a touch of awe. Sometimes, children would point and whisper, not cruelly but with wonder. That's her. That's the strong lady from the fire. Maria kept her head down. Still, she could feel the whispers gathering into something larger. The first time it happened, she was carrying 2 sacks across the yard when a teenage boy approached, awkward in his 2 large boots. Ms. Tran? He asked, voice cracking at the edge of adolescence. Yes? I was wondering if you could show me how to do that. He gestured to the sacks slung across her shoulders. Without, breaking my back. Maria blinked at him. You shouldn't be carrying this much weight. I want to, though. Not rice exactly, but strength. Like you. He shifted from foot to foot, embarrassed. I'm tired of being the weak one. Something in his voice struck her. Not bravado, but hunger. A hunger she recognized. She studied him a moment, then set down the sacks. Come here. He stepped forward, wide-eyed. Bend your knees. Grip close. Keep it against your body. The weight doesn't fight as much if you don't let it swing. He followed her instructions, straining but managing to lift a half-sack off the ground. His face lit up as if he'd hoisted a trophy. Good, Maria said. But don't rush. Strength is a habit, not a trick. The boy grinned. Thanks, Miss Tran. He trotted off, lighter in spirit if not in muscle. Maria watched him go, unsettled. She hadn't intended to teach, but it seemed teaching had come to her. Within weeks, more young people began approaching. Some were sons of mill workers, tired of watching their fathers stoop. Some were daughters who'd been told muscles weren't for them. They came hesitantly, respectfully, like petitioners before a judge. Could you show us how to lift without getting hurt? What do you eat when you want to be strong? Is it true you used to be in competitions? At first, Maria deflected. She wasn't a coach anymore. She wasn't anyone's symbol. But their persistence wore down her walls. They weren't asking for medals or miracles. They were asking for guidance, something she knew how to give. So one evening, she cleared a space behind the half-rebuilt warehouse. She dragged out a few spare sacks, some old pallets, even a rusted bar left from a dismantled scaffold. And when the youths arrived, uncertain but eager, she began. First rule, she said, folding her arms. Respect the weight. Always. No showing off, no shortcuts. They nodded. Second rule. Listen to your body. Pain is not proof. Pain is a warning. More nods. Third rule. Strength is for carrying, not crushing. If you use it to make others smaller, you've already lost. Silence followed this one thoughtful silence. Then, one by one, they tried. It was clumsy at first. Sacks dropped, boards slipped, stumbles abounded. But Maria corrected patiently. Elbows higher, hips through, keep your back straight. And when one of them finally managed a clean lift, the cheer that rose wasn't for the weight. It was for the shared victory. Maria felt something loosen in her chest. It wasn't the roar of a crowd, the kind she'd once known on stages. It was smaller but purer. It was community. Word spread quickly. Soon, every evening after work, a little training circle formed behind the warehouse. Some days 5 or 6 youths, other days a dozen. A few adults joined too, laughing at their own clumsy attempts. Maria never advertised it, never called it a class. But people came because hope travels without needing permission. She showed them lifts with rice sacks, presses with wooden beams, balance drills using nothing but body weight. She spoke rarely, but when she did, they listened as if her words were weights themselves. And little by little, they grew stronger, not just in muscle but in confidence. Ms. Tran, one girl panted after finishing a set. Do you think I could be, like you? A real lifter? Maria wiped sweat from her brow. She wanted to say, I'm not what you think I am. She wanted to say, I stopped being that person long ago. But when she looked at the girl's determined eyes, she said instead, you can be stronger than me, if you want it enough. The girl smiled so wide it lit the yard brighter than the floodlights. Of course, not everyone approved. One evening, as Maria was wrapping a boy's wrist with tape, an older man strode up. He was a mill foreman, broad-shouldered but soft-bellied, the kind of man who measured worth in wages. What's this then? He barked. A circus? Maria straightened. It's exercise. Better than idling. Better than working overtime? The man sneered. You filling their heads with nonsense? Making them think they'll be champions instead of laborers? The group fell silent. Eyes darted between Maria and the foreman. She met his glare evenly. I'm teaching them to carry without breaking. That helps in work, too. He snorted. Work doesn't need heroes. Work needs obedience. Maria's jaw tightened. Memories rose, judges, medals, a coffin lowered into earth. She thought of all the time strength had been mistaken for rebellion. Obedience doesn't rebuild warehouses, she said quietly. People do. People who know how to carry together. For a long moment silence hung. Then one of the boys lifted a sack and set it squarely on his shoulders. Not defiantly but steadily. Others followed. The foreman muttered something and walked away. Maria exhaled. She hadn't meant to make a stand. But perhaps some stands make themselves. By autumn, the circle had become part of the town's rhythm. After the day's labor, laughter and shouts echoed behind the warehouse as youths trained under Maria's watchful eye. Parents, once skeptical, began dropping off their children with baskets of food as thanks. Maria never asked for payment. What she received instead was more valuable. A village waking up to its own strength. Even Tessa noticed. One evening she sat on the edge of a pallet, scribbling notes as the youths trained. This isn't just exercise, she murmured. It's a movement. Don't call it that, Maria warned. Movements get twisted. This is just carrying. But inside, she felt the stir of something she hadn't felt in years. Not glory, not ambition, purpose. And it terrified her, because she knew what purpose cost. One night, after dismissing the circle, Maria lingered alone. She picked up a sack, heavier than most, and pressed it overhead. The movement was smooth, clean. For a heartbeat, she felt 19 again. Chalk on her hands, light in her eyes, the world shouting her name. But then she lowered the weight, set it down, and whispered to the empty yard. Never again. She wasn't sure if it was a promise or a lie. The morning the warehouse reopened, the town woke up as if expecting weather. People dressed in their Sunday shirts even though it was a Thursday, ironed collars and smooth hems, tugged at cuffs that hadn't mattered yesterday. Banners stretched across Maine like stitches. Welcome back, Oakridge. The smell of sawdust had been replaced by something brighter. Fresh varnish, cut ribbon, coffee brewed strong enough to keep hope upright. Maria stood just beyond the new loading bay with her palms resting lightly on her thighs, as if bracing for a bar that wasn't there. She had arrived before dawn, the way she used to for meets, to learn the room while it was still quiet, to make friends with edges and corners, to let her breathing find the angles of a place. In the pale light, the new building felt almost shy, its beams square and honest, its floorboards unwarped, the rafters clean ribs instead of charred ones. A high window admitted a stripe of sky that would tell time without a clock. You're early, Elena said, appearing beside her like a verdict with kind eyes. I'm always early, Maria said, and it was both joke and truth. Elena nodded as if they'd just shared a cue. She bypassed sentiment. How is the shoulder? Annoyed. Functional. Like its owner. Elena handed her a roll of tape and didn't watch to see whether Maria would use it. They want you at the front when the mayor speaks. I said I'd stand with everyone. You will, Elena said. Some of us simply stand in a way that makes others stand straighter. Maria made a face. I don't want a speech. Then don't give one, Elena said. Give them something else. What? You'll know the moment it asks to be lifted. Outside, the hum of the town gathered. Vendors clattered tables and unfolded tents. Somewhere to the left, a brass quintet rehearsed a hymn without deciding on a tempo. Children tested the limits of their formal shoes. Lila skipped alongside Angela Reyes, Daniel's sister. Matching steps on the sidewalk cracks, a game of hopscotch drawn in two different alphabets. Mom! Lila's voice carried its own instrument. She sprinted over and crashed into Maria's hip. I made a sign, she announced, brandishing a piece of poster board with marker letters. We all carried. The handwriting was better than it had been. The heart in the corner had learned a steadier curve. It's perfect, Maria said, tracing the words. Angela arrived a beat later, slightly winded, laughing. She runs like you. Like Daniel, Maria said, and they let the line sit between them like a small bridge. It held. Tessa approached with her notebook tucked under her arm, a camera slung at her hip more like a canteen than a weapon. No surprises, she said when Maria raised an eyebrow. I'm off duty. Mostly. I brought muffins. She lifted a paper bag. Journalistic ethics require blueberry. Ethics? Elena muttered. Have never been so sweet. They ate standing up the way you do at beginnings. The muffins were too crumbly and therefore ideal. When the mayor's office began funneling people toward the red ribbon strung across the doors, Maria felt the town's heat tilt in her direction. Gentle but undeniable. She had learned to be invisible by habit. This was the opposite, to be seen without performing. It still made her skin feel one size too small. The mayor, a man whose hair understood cameras, tapped the microphone and sent a squawk across the yard. He spoke the language of occasions. Resilience, gratitude, renewal. He said Maria's name 3 times. The crowd clapped each time. Maria could feel the applause striking her like warm rain. She let it fall and tried not to drown. Before we cut the ribbon, the mayor said, we have a tradition in Oak Ridge. We mark our beginnings with a gesture that belongs to us. Today, at the suggestion of more than a few of you, we will start with what we all do best. He gestured toward a new pallet near the loading bay where 3 pristine 100-pound sacks of rice waited. A lift. A murmur rose. Soft laughter. Delighted shock. Something like relief. Maria felt Elena's glance without looking. She felt the way the town's attention changed temperature. No longer hot with spectacle, but warm with invitation. She could refuse. She could tell them the symbol made her itch. She could say that strength wasn't a party trick. But across the yard, she saw the circle of youths she'd been training. A cluster of faces tilted to her like flowers. She saw the foreman who had barked now standing with his hands clasped, humbled by logistics he had not controlled. She saw the firefighters, a row of shoulders that understood rooms full of smoke. She saw Angela, whose smile contained a history. She saw Tessa press her pen farther into her notebook as if promising not to use it. And she saw Lila, holding the sign with both hands, standing too close to the line where the ribbon waited to be cut. The moment asked to be lifted. Maria stepped forward. The crowd's sound thinned. In the clearing, she became what she had always been inside herself. A person assembling attention. She crouched by the first sack without dramatics. No chalk, no bounce, no ritualized theatrics. She wrapped her hands, taped and scarred, around the fabric in a grip that had learned 1,000 small conversations with weight. She hugged the sack to her sternum, feeling its slosh, its reluctance, the way it tested the edges of her balance. Close, she called gently, and 2 of her students stepped in without needing names. Hands here, feet there. We move together. They did. The sack cleared the pallet, rose in a coordinated breath, and found the new floor. The crowd murmured not at the heft but at the choreography. Maria felt the surge she always felt when a weight left the ground with the consent of more than one person, an assent signed by many hands. They repeated with the second sack and then the third. On that one, Maria let her hands hold a fraction longer. She pressed not all the way overhead, this wasn't a platform and she wasn't proving anything, but to the line where her triceps hummed and her chest lifted and the room could see the map of her effort. In the instant before she set it down, she found Daniel in the corner of her mind, as if he were leaning on the doorframe of the moment. He had always said. The word steadied her grip. When the sack landed, the cheer did not break her. It joined her, a sound built from many throats. Children clapped with their whole arms. The brass quintet forgot to be formal. Even the mayor's hair seemed to let go. Ribbon, Elena said dryly, nudging the ceremony back onto its rails. Scissors appeared. The ribbon fluttered to the ground. A theatrical wound healed. People poured in as if the doors led not just to a building but to a season. They traced fingers along the smooth edges of new tables. They patted the forklift like a horse. They read safety placards out loud as if they were poems. Maria stepped aside to breathe. Tessa found her in the wings, kept her voice low. That was not a performance. Good, Maria said. It was a lesson, Tessa said. I was watching faces. Do you realize what you just showed them? That 3 bags weigh less in many hands? Maria offered. That, Tessa said. And also that the person they want to put on a pedestal refuses to stand there alone. She hesitated. I've been writing a piece. It isn't about heroism. It's about practice. About what you've taught these kids and what they're teaching each other, and what towns like ours forget until something burns. Maria exhaled through her nose. You'll make us sound better than we are. I'll make us sound like we are, Tessa said. Which is harder. Use the line from the fence if you want, Maria said. We all carried. Tessa grinned, startled by the permission. I will. She tucked the notebook away. And there's one more thing. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a photograph, glossy, professionally lit. Maria and a half-dozen teenagers, mouths open mid-laugh, sacks in their arms, dust floating like glitter in the dusk. Tessa had caught it on a night when no one had been paying attention to narrative, only to breath. It's for the wall, Tessa said. Not the paper. Maria ran a thumb along the edge. Thank you. Also, Tessa added, eyes twinkling, my editor insists I ask, are you starting a program? The circle has a waiting list the length of a hardware receipt. Maria opened her mouth to deflect. Then she closed it. She looked across the room at the corner near the southeast window where the light made a square on the floor. She saw, as if overlaying the present with a tracing paper future, a rack of beat-up bars, a chalk bowl, a whiteboard with 2 sentences. Precision is mercy. Strength is a habit. She saw kids bringing their own water bottles and older men stepping in to spot and women teaching girls how to hinge at the hip like truth. She saw a name on a door that didn't feel like a brand but like a welcome. Not a program, she said. A room. Open hours. Anyone can come if they agree to the rules. Tessa's pen reappeared as if it had always been there. Rules? Respect the weight. Listen to your body. Strength is for carrying, not crushing. She paused. No fees. We trade in chores. Sweep, stack, fix, learn, teach. Tessa wrote fast, then stopped, grinning at the last part. This town will try to put your picture on a plaque. You're going to make them bring a broom. Good brooms are underrated, Maria said. Spoken like a coach, Tessa murmured, and slipped back into the crowd before Maria could argue with the word. Coach, Elena said, appearing with the kind of stealth that comes from decades of gyms where attention is a currency. Would you like an application? Maria rolled her eyes. Do coaches roll their eyes? The best ones do, Elena said. She softened. Her voice dropped to something almost private. I'm proud of you. Maria's throat went tight in that troublesome way. For what? For letting the bar be the bar and the story be the story, Elena said. For not confusing the two. Is there tape for that? Maria asked. There is tea, Elena said, and pressed a thermos into Maria's hand. Across the room, the brass quintet switched to an old waltz. Couples laughed and tried to remember how feet were supposed to do certain patterns. Lila tugged Angela into a spin, then crashed into a sack of rice and collapsed giggling. The foreman who had once scoffed carried 2 folding chairs without being asked and set them exactly where they were needed. Someone started a line of people signing up for volunteer shifts to keep the afterwork circle clean and open. It was as if the town had decided strength was contagious and had come to catch it. Later, when the sun leaned behind the water tower and turned the warehouse windows into rectangles of gold, Maria gathered the kids by the chalkboard that didn't yet exist. She sketched rules in the air with her finger and made them repeat each line until the words sat right in their mouths. She showed a girl how to wrap a wrist. She corrected a boy's habit of shrugging early. She told an older woman that her hip hinge was the best she'd seen all day, and the woman stood 2 inches taller for the rest of the afternoon. Angela pulled Maria aside near the loading bay. He'd have loved this, she said simply. Maria nodded. I know. Do you ever feel like lifting him? Angela asked with a crooked smile, tapping her heart. All the time, Maria said. But I've learned to set him down. He doesn't mind. He knows where to find me. They stood shoulder to shoulder, a posture that asked for nothing and gave much. As twilight collected, the mayor tried to end things twice and failed both times. The town was not done being with itself. At last, when the sky had gone the deep blue that makes streetlights feel like stars that have made a deal, Maria clapped once. Before we go, she called, and the room quieted without effort. One more lift. Groans playful. Laughter. Curiosity. She walked to the center of the floor and placed a single sack there. Not the heaviest, not the lightest. She didn't pick it up. She placed her palm on it and looked around. I'm not the only one who carries, she said. We know that. We say it. Today I want to show it. She beckoned. The firefighter with soot still living permanent in the lines of his hands, the nurse who'd worked doubles after the fire, the teenage boy who'd first asked her to teach him, the girl with the steady eyes, the foreman who'd learned in public, the elder whose hips had relearned hinge, Tessa with her pen put away, Elena who never performed, Angela who belonged to the word we in the oldest sense, and Lila, small and fierce, sign still clutched like a banner. They circled the sack. Maria knelt without theatrics and slid her fingers under a corner. Not high, she said. Just enough. 8 hands joined, then 10, then 12. On Maria's count, breathe in now. They lifted. 1 inch 2, 4. It wasn't impressive in the way that breaks records. It was impressive in the way that repairs worlds. The sack hovered, a common miracle, and then settled back to earth quick and clean, like a blessing. The room exhaled in one piece. Someone began to clap and then stopped because clapping felt too small. Instead, people reached for one another, placed palms to shoulders, pressed foreheads, laughed the way people laugh when the floor under them has agreed to hold. You'll call it the last lift, Elena said softly, knowing the mind of anyone who names chapters. But it is not last. No, Maria said. It's the one that teaches the next. The crowd drifted toward the doors, the night warm and close. On the threshold, Maria paused, turned, and looked back at the room. The clean lines of the rafters, the shine of new floorboards, the scuffs already beginning. In the far corner, by that southeast window she'd chosen in her mind, she imagined the future chalk bowl. A small dusting of white clouded the air in her thoughts, and she smiled because she knew what it was to breathe that dust and feel it right permission in her throat. Mom! Lila tugged her hand. Can we come back tomorrow? We can, Maria said. And the day after. And the day after? As long as there's lifting to do. Okay. Lila tilted her head, thinking. What if there's nothing heavy? Then we lift light things well, Maria said. And we teach someone else to lift. They stepped into the night. Crickets found their instruments. Someone down the block let a screen door slam and then apologized to the dark. Above the roofline, stars gathered in neighborhoods. The new warehouse, anchored and patient, gleamed like a proposition kept. Maria felt the tiredness arrive. Not hostile, just honest. Her hands, wrapped and unwrapped 100 times, ached to promise. Her shoulder hummed. Her ribs remembered the heat of a different season and compared it to this one. A warmth with a door you can walk through. She glanced once more at the sign in Lila's grip. We all carried. It had been a sentence on a fence. Now it was a law in her marrow. Ready? Angela asked. Yes, Maria said. And the word meant today and tomorrow and the ordinary Tuesdays that teach you more than any blaze. She squeezed Lila's fingers, nodded to Elena, to Tessa, to the faces that made a town, and walked home at the easy pace of someone who has learned how to put weight down without letting it fall. At the corner, the brass quintet tried one last song and finally chose a tempo together. In the quiet between notes, the world seemed to say what the crowd had tried all day to articulate and what Maria had finally let herself hear. Some lifts are yours alone. The best ones are ours. She carried that sentence the way she carried everything that mattered. Close, careful, and, when the time came, shared.